The first thing I want to talk about is just our process of opening up the app. As everyone knows, this is the main thing that we're focused on as a project right now. And I want to just talk a little bit about how that's gonna play out. So, I've gotten some questions about what's going to happen after March. What is this process? What are things going to look like going forward? So, the way that we're opening up access to our app in Venezuela and Argentina, Colombia, and Panama is that for the first 2 weeks of March, so starting at the beginning of this week and going until the end of next week, what we're doing is going through and adding everybody who's joined the wait list over the past several months. So we're adding quite a lot of people every day and getting them set up, teaching new users how to use the app. And basically, 2 weeks was like the fastest we could do that because when somebody joins the app, they don't know how to use it yet, and it's a little bit different from a normal financial app. And so people typically have questions that they ask of us. And so we need to be prepared to field those questions when new people join the app. And because of that reason, we wanted to limit the rate of people joining off of the wait list during this period. So 2 weeks of adding people from the wait list. And then the next 2 weeks, people can directly join without getting on the wait list at all from those countries. If you're from a different country, unfortunately, you'll still get put on the wait list because we don't have service in other places yet. But if you're in one of our countries of access, then during the second 2 weeks of March, you can just join and directly create an account and start using the app. And hopefully we won't be too overwhelmed with the numbers. Hopefully our customer support staff will be able to keep up. I think that we will be able to do that based on the recent hires that we've made. So then there's a question of what happens starting in April. So in April, we are going to, we're not going to leave the app fully open for people to continue joining. And the reason is because we have to have some way to control the rate of growth in case it gets out of control, in case it is faster than our staff can handle and faster than we can grow our operation. Because it's really important that as new people continue to encounter Reserve and try it out, that they have a good initial experience and that our overall service for all of the existing users doesn't degrade. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to allow people who have Reserve accounts, we're going to issue them invites so that they can invite other people that they're friends or family with, or even people that they meet on the internet. If they want to hand their invites out publicly, that's okay too. Um, and what that does is it means that you have to find someone who has an invite in order to join, and we can then change the rate that we issue new invites to people. So it could be that on 1 week, everybody gets, 5 new invites that they can send out to people. But if the growth is going too quickly, then we can be like, oh, okay, we're going to slow it down a little bit. We're only going to give people a couple invites a week, or maybe there'd be a week where we don't give out any invites because of something that we have to handle. So basically, that allows us to grow as fast as possible without growing too fast if necessary. And so that's the system that's going to start in early April. So behind the scenes of all of this, there's a lot of customer support happening. So as we recently announced, we've hired a bunch of new team members. Our team is up to 57 team members now, which is pretty exciting. And the biggest thing that those customer support team members have to handle are spikes in activity when a lot of new people join the app. Like I explained, if you're a new user, you tend to have a lot more questions. And so we've tried to put together a team where we can actually handle, in every single minute of every single day, all of the queries that might pop up. And the other major thing that we've been working on, again, as I've mentioned before, is automation. So we've been putting a bunch of work into automating a bunch of the fiat transactions that happen behind the scenes when somebody is cashing in or cashing out with Venezuelan bolivars or Argentinian pesos or any other currency, including other cryptocurrencies. And a future piece that we are getting closer to working on, something that we've spent time planning and architecting, but we're not yet currently writing the code, is the sort of next level of upgrade to the exchange mechanism that works in the background for the Reserve app, where today we have a bunch of payment processors who are connected to the app, and the system for routing transactions from customers to payment processors is pretty simple. And we have a whole architecture plan for how to make that more nuanced and how to automate that a lot more so we can handle increasing volumes of transactions. And so we're excited to begin building that relatively soon. And there's a whole bunch of other little things that have been built out, things that we've done to improve the way that the app works for users, in order to facilitate more people using it at once, without having any issues. So the next thing for me to touch on briefly is, we've been focused on hiring engineers. As you've seen, we've been posting publicly about the fact that engineering recruiting is a really big deal for us. And I wanted to share that we've hired 2 engineers so far this year who I'm really excited about. I think the whole team is really excited about them. We put a lot of work and care into finding great ones who are really good cultural fits for our team and who really get what we're doing. Both of the ones we've hired so far from Argentina, but we're speaking to engineers from all over the world. I speak to a lot of them from the US and also several other countries. And I've been spending a lot of my time personally speaking with software engineers and managing that process, in order to make sure that we get the best ones we can get. And we have a really growing pipeline, and we'll continue to hire more. We've been putting a lot of effort as a team back into recruiting to build out our recruiting pipeline, where we have like a whole update to our website that we're working on that will come out sometime in the next few months when we have the time, to improve the public's understanding of what we're doing, both the RSR community, but also a big focus on that is potential recruits, and that's engineers and also other team members. And that shift is consistent with what our focus has been starting at the beginning of this year. As we've mentioned several times, we really are shifting to focus on growth. So for the whole past year, we are really trying to stay as small as possible, trying to be nimble, trying to learn and update our understanding of our market and tweak our product. And we've gotten to the point where we're very happy with the product, and we're excited to try to scale that operation and serve as many people as possible. And so then I have 2 more things to add to the sort of brief announcement section here. So one is that there will be some upcoming RSR token movements. So as you guys probably all know from our blog post over a month ago, we unlocked some RSR tokens from the Slow wallet, which is the smart contract where there's a 4-week cryptographic delay. If we want to withdraw any tokens from that, we have to make an announcement and wait 4 weeks. And that's so that if anybody doesn't like the fact that we're going to release tokens, they have ample time to exit their RSR position if they feel inclined to do so. So it's been, I think, 5 or so weeks since we made that announcement. And so those tokens are unlocked now. And so hopefully anyone who was concerned with that has had time to exit. And so I think that information is fairly priced in at this point. We haven't moved any of those tokens, and I just wanted to briefly mention that sometime in the next week, we're going to get around to moving them. And it's going to be a very large transaction, and those tend to sometimes cause alarm bells. So I wanted you guys, the people on this call, or some of the people who are most interested in and most dedicated to our project out there, I wanted everyone to know and have a heads up that that's going to happen. And if people on Twitter talk about it or they're worried about it, I ask you guys to help me and help the project in pointing people to that blog post, to try to explain the purpose for those tokens, and the reason why we're doing that. We won't necessarily have time to sit and monitor Twitter and answer people's questions about it. That's part of the reason we put out the post. And so I just wanted to brief you guys, let you know that that's going to happen so that you can point people to that post. And, I think a common question might be, is the team dumping? Are all these tokens going to be sold all at once? It's a lot of tokens, and it is a lot of tokens. And I think the thing that I need you guys to help me explain to people who know less about the project, is that, A, the purpose of this is to, slowly accumulate a marketing war chest, and we've been, I think, pretty clear in disclosing exactly, how we're thinking about that in the blog post. But the other piece is that the plan isn't to sell all these tokens right away by any means. The point of moving these tokens to exchange accounts is to be prepared throughout the course of this entire year and even next year for a case where the market continues to heat up even more. And so a way that you could explain it to people is that if RSR hits $1 by the end of this year, as many of you guys have predicted it will, it would be kind of a big strategic mistake if the project hadn't positioned itself to be able to sell some RSR and create that marketing war chest. So you can think of it as, preparing for cases where the market heats up even more to be able to strategically take advantage of that for the project. And I think that that can be a really healthy thing for the long term of the project, even though it does include us selling some tokens. The last thing I want to mention to get us started is I want to comment on a blog post that we released a few minutes ago. Probably a lot of you haven't seen it yet, but if you go to our Twitter right now, you can find the link to that blog post. And the blog post isn't really an announcement, but it does kind of contain an interesting announcement of some information that we haven't mentioned publicly before. So the post overall discusses how we are looking for highly dedicated people from all of the countries that we want to serve, where it's really essential to the project to find, initially one key person and then to be able to build out a team of people from each country who really get it, who really understand the monetary situation in that country, who understand the nature of crypto and crypto regulation in that country, who are really well networked with people in the industry who can help us achieve what we want to achieve. And this is something that we've done in Venezuela. We've done it, we've been fantastically successful with our team building in Venezuela. And that's something that we don't talk about very often because, out of caution, we usually don't mention our Venezuelan team members. But we decided to go ahead and talk about that a little bit to try to make this point, to try to make the point of how important it is for us to find the right people to build out these teams in each respective country, and to talk about one particular person who we decided to bring on, who's been instrumental in us building that team out. And so that person is named Gabriel Jimenez, and it's actually funny because over the course of the past year, many of you guys have sent me personally Gabriel's article in the New York Times because Gabriel was involved in some interesting high profile projects in Venezuela. Many of you have sent his article and a sort of corresponding video documentary that's been made about him to me to say, hey, you should really talk to this guy. Maybe he could be a key part of the Reserve Project. And what we were not saying for the whole past year is he's actually been part of the core team this entire time. And so Gabriel and also everybody else who's on the Venezuelan team, many of whom he helped recruit, and then we've sort of expanded out from there, have been really, really key to us being able to achieve what we've gotten to so far. It'd be very hard for us, sitting in Silicon Valley, not understanding the Venezuelan context, to produce an app that really made sense to people in Venezuela. And so building out that team who are Venezuelans, where at this point, I think, something like 3/4 of our team is in Latin America somewhere, and the majority of those are in Venezuela. That's been really important for us getting to where we are today. So I guess I'm even going to take a couple minutes here and just talk about the story of meeting Gabriel and bringing him on, and I'll try to give some context for why we haven't mentioned before that he's a part of the team. So um, I met Gabriel, and this is described a little bit in the blog post, but I met Gabriel because I was invited to speak at SF Blockchain Week back in 2019, and I was asked to talk about our efforts in Venezuela, which we were just getting started on at the time. And Gabriel was the speaker right before me in line. And he was there to talk about the Petro, which is the state-backed cryptocurrency issued in Venezuela. And it turns out that he was somewhat involved in the Petro project. And so many people were very, very skeptical of Gabriel because in Venezuela, there's a general assumption that if you work with the government, you could potentially be like some sort of corrupt person. And so there was resistance to the idea that Gabriel was actually interested in improving the lives of Venezuelans and actually interested in creating economic freedom for people in Venezuela. But I decided that if he really was for real, if he really actually did care about those things, that he could be a really key part of our project. And so I actually kind of took an interesting leap of faith. I spent a few hours getting to know him, and I told him, I think you might want to join our project. And I invited him to live with me. I invited him to actually come move into my apartment because he didn't live in the Bay Area at the time, and I wanted him to get to know us. I wanted us to get to know him. And because he was a sort of politically charged figure, we couldn't just immediately invite him onto the team. In fact, several people on the team, including myself, were pretty cautious. We're pretty concerned about should we get involved with someone who has this sort of history, this sort of experience in the past, this sort of connection with the Venezuelan government in some sense. And so we actually spent months living together with me, sort of carefully getting to know Gabriel, carefully sort of evaluating him. I ran some background checks myself. And then he was doing the same thing with us. He was getting to know us, trying to figure out were we really serious about this? Were we actually going to follow through with our plans in Venezuela? He also spent some time, thinking about like, well, is this really the project to bet on? When he was just meeting us, he didn't know if it was us or someone else that was really going to follow through. So he went and spent some time speaking to people at the Libra Project and Cello and perhaps others to try to evaluate, who was going to be most serious about making this happen. And ultimately, he was convinced that it was us, and we were convinced that he was really actually an excellent potential team member, and so we decided to bring him onto the team full time in 2020. And since then, he's been helping out in a really impressive way. I'm super, super happy about our decision, and I think he is too. And so I'm excited to share this with you guys. It's a piece of information that I've wanted to talk about, but we've been a little bit cautious about talking about it because we just didn't want to make waves too early in the Venezuelan community. Some people have a negative perception because of the fact that he touched the Petro project. But if you read the article, I think you'll see why we think that that's not an issue. And especially now that we've reached a point where the project really can sort of stand on its own, people can evaluate the product and the service in their own right. We felt that it was no longer necessary to keep that information private. So I'm excited to mention that he's a part of the team. And again, this is being shared in part because I want to try to explain and give an example of what it is that I mean when I say that we need to find people who are like really hardcore, who really are dedicated to doing this kind of thing in their country. Gabriel's a great example of that, and the other people that we've been able to bring on in Venezuela, in part because he's been a part of the team, really are an example of that. So we want to replicate that same kind of process with people across all the different countries that we're excited to go into. So I think that wraps up the basic things I wanted to talk about up front. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. Again, please don't shout over each other, but you can, there's no process for raising your hand. You can go ahead and just ask a question. I won't necessarily answer everything. I might decline to answer some things, but feel free to ask anything that you'd like to.
Hey, Nevin, I have a quick
Hi,
question
Nevin.
there. Do you see this app being opened up worldwide eventually in years to come down the road?
Yes, our intention is for the app to be open worldwide eventually. And the way to think about that is that in each new country, if we just open up, if we just open up very basic liquidity, but we don't do anything to support that, then it could be problematic. It could be the transactions end up being slow, or there's something that could be going wrong. So we kind of have to take an active approach at least at the beginning of the project when we're opening in each new place. And some people on the call are probably familiar with this metaphor. We compare it a little bit to the process of rolling out Uber or Lyft or Didi if you're for Asia. So basically, you want to sort of start by figuring out the formula, figuring out the logistical setup, and then once you get that ironed out, then you can start to replicate that in more and more places. But the eventual goal is to have the app be completely open to everybody in the world and to support, a huge number of currencies and a huge number of payment methods for each currency all across the world so that you can really move your money in from almost anything and move it out to almost anything else. And actually, I'm going to take the opportunity to mention something cool about that I'm excited about, which is that the way our service works, we actually allow you to make payments in payment methods that are connected to Reserve, even if you don't have that payment method yourself. So for example, if you, let's say I want to make a payment to somebody in Venezuela, and let's say they're not even a Reserve user yet, and they just have a Venezuelan Bolivar bank account, I can actually, with my Reserve app, make a transaction that lands in their Venezuelan Bolivar bank account. So it empowers me to make Venezuelan Bolivar payments or Argentinian peso payments, even if I don't have those accounts, and even if I couldn't sign up for those accounts, right? So if you're someone from the US like me, it's actually really hard to get a bank account in other countries like that. And so this enables you to make payments elsewhere in the payment system that you couldn't ordinarily get access. And so with that global vision of having that connection with almost all the different currencies in the world, that can make it so that you, no matter which country you're from, you can make payments to pretty much anyone, even if they're not a Reserve user yet, because you can sort of trigger those payments with those other payment methods. That's something that we're super excited about, seeing what the network effects and the impact of that will look like as we grow that out to multiple different countries. So thank you for the question.
Hi, Nevin. I have a question. I've been investing in RSR since like 2019. I'm super bullish on it, but lately I've been thinking more and more about what kind of potential fundamental risk there might be to the project or threat.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, how real do you think that like the governments of your target markets are suddenly going to decide to just ban the service just in order to protect their exclusivity towards their own monetary system?
It's a good question. So and the answer is, I think actually it's sort of more nuanced than I had anticipated going into the project. So I'll try to shine some light on that nuance. Um, I guess on a high level, it's definitely something we consider. It's definitely something that we do think could happen for sure. So from your perspective, thinking about the risks, you should assume like, yes, this is a real possibility. And I'm definitely not here to say that that's not going to happen. And because of that, we are building out the system in such a way where it is meant to be able to continue operating even if the local authorities aren't necessarily happy about it at that period of time.
不知道，你就那个传出来。
Okay. So oh wait, actually, is that yeah. All right. So the lost my train of thought there. Okay, right. So even though we are preparing for that possibility, even though that we're building a decentralized fiat on and off ramp system that's meant to be able to function under those conditions where local authorities aren't necessarily happy about it, it may not be that likely for there to be any sort of sustained banning. And here is why. So one pattern that we've noticed is that when a country gets pretty far along in the process of hyperinflation, the government can actually decide, you know what, it's not necessarily a bad thing to allow our citizens to use stable foreign currencies. And we see this in Venezuela as an example, where in Venezuela, it is currently totally tolerated to make transactions in cash US dollars. And in fact, in many cities, well over half of transactions where you're just going to the store and buying something are happening in cash US dollars. Um, you know, a while back, that's something that was unheard of in Venezuela. People were a little bit afraid to reveal that they were holding cash US dollars, and there weren't a whole lot of transactions happening in public. We actually got to a point where the leader of Venezuela actually publicly said something like, "Thank God for the dollarization," sort of showing his appreciation for the fact that foreign currencies coming in and being used actually helped stabilize the economy and helped sort of protect the functioning of the country. So what I'm trying to say there is there are times when governments, that are involved in hyperinflationary scenarios can actually choose to welcome external solutions that are different from their own monetary system. But that's certainly not always the case. So like if we look at Argentina today, it is the case that you are limited to not being able to purchase more than something like 200 US dollars per month. And you might think about that and say, okay, well, maybe that's because they're not really off the deep end in hyperinflation, so the government is still sort of grappling, trying to maintain control. Well, there's one more nuanced point to mention there, which is that the government is the Argentinian central bank has a bunch of US dollars. And those capital controls that are in place, one of the principal reasons for those controls are so that the central bank doesn't have to spend too many of its own US dollars, basically processing those currency conversions on behalf of citizens so that they have control of that US dollar budget and can use those dollars in more targeted ways. So they can basically give preferential access to businesses who are import businesses that import important goods and services to the country. And if you start to think about it from the country's perspective, making sure that you have plenty of US dollars to be able to deal in foreign markets and making sure that your businesses that are importing the most important goods and services use those dollars, that makes sense. There's actually sort of some logic to that. And so there are lots of practices in Argentina, for example, where people buy and sell cash US dollars, or people will do something called contado con liqui, which is where you buy like a bond in Argentina and then you move it to foreign markets and you sell it for US dollars. Those are all ways of people getting access to dollars which don't deplete the central bank's dollar balance. And those are actually tolerated. In some cases, they're legal. In some cases, they're not officially legal. But in all cases, they're actually tolerated. The government doesn't work very hard to shut those down. And I personally think that's because the thing they principally care about is the central bank's dollar balance. So this is all just to say that there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a product or service like this might be attacked by local governments. And we think that in many cases, the reason for an attack is actually some sort of political narrative battle where like if we come out and say lots of negative things about some local government, they might feel the need to strike back. But so yeah, so I hope that helps. It's definitely not a solid answer because it is a gray area. And like I said, it is a risk. But there are all those different factors that go into it. And we spend time, as you can tell, learning about those factors and trying to track them and understand when we might be encountering that risk and when not.
Hey, Niven, so I've got a question. So over the last couple of days, I've seen some posts on Reddit by people in Turkey and Iran who've been talking about how people in those countries are buying like Cardano and Bitcoin because of the spiraling inflation. And my question is like, how do you think Reserve would differentiate itself from other projects like Cardano? Like, why do you think it's a matter of competition, or do you think that these could exist side by side in places where inflation is very high, like people choosing Cardano or Reserve?
Right. Well, yeah, great question. Just to remind everybody, like try to keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, just to make sure we can all hear each other. So the The answer to that is, we are obviously working to offer a stable coin. And so if somebody is interested in value, that is stable against the US dollar, that's what we offer today. And then in the long term, our plan is to offer something that's stable, irrespective of the US dollar, as you all probably know. So that's kind of the simplest differentiator. But what I will say in answer to your question is, um, if cryptocurrency like speculation tools, like people buying and selling volatile crypto assets, if those get started and they flourish in any given country, that actually, in a sense, is helpful for us, and it's helpful for crypto dollar adoption generally, because what it does is it provides an incentive for liquidity providers and exchange operators to basically build that infrastructure and get that liquidity going. And that liquidity can then be used in the course of rolling out an operation like Reserve, or another stablecoin option in a country like that. And so, generally speaking, having the adoption of people buying and selling Bitcoin or Cardano or any volatile crypto asset in an economy like that is I think a positive initial step that can help with the process of bootstrapping liquidity for then providing something like we provide, which is, it's very different. It's more like a standard fintech type service, where it doesn't really feel like a crypto exchange. But in the back end, sometimes those transactions can be happening, and that can be useful for that provision of liquidity. So I personally think that that's probably a positive development, for even for the sake of people who aren't participating in that yet, who don't really know anything about cryptocurrency, but maybe in the future could use a service like Reserve that benefits from some of that liquidity that's built up.
Hi, Nevin. You mentioned that this year the company is positioning itself for growth, and talked about all the additional hires with the new team members. So with the growth in mind, is there any updates on the release of the mainnet?
Yep, it's a good question. We don't have an update on that yet. We definitely anticipate doing it this year, but we don't have a specific timeline that we want to announce quite yet.
Hi, Nevin. So one of the list, the topic I want to talk about is competitions. So I talk to my friends a lot about ISR, and they tend to compare ISR to Luna and Terra USD. And when they want to go on a coin market cap and they see Terra USD market cap is like $750 million stable coin, so they would hit me with, why is it that Terra is doing much better than the Reserve? And I really want to give them an answer, but I'm sort of stuck, and myself, with my limited knowledge, I wouldn't be able to answer that question either. So I was hoping you would be able to answer it.
Yeah, it's a reasonable question. And you can look at Terra as an example, but even like other stablecoins, like Tether and USDC, we're talking billions in market cap, even much more. DAI in particular, also over $1 billion. It's like pretty exciting, pretty impressive. And here we are with like, this tiny, tiny market cap in comparison. So I think it's a reasonable question to ask. The basic difference between our project and those other projects, generally speaking, is that we made a conscious decision to not focus on serving crypto speculation, and instead to focus on serving people in countries that have currency issues. And we believe that over the course of time, that market is enormous. It's like really, really big. It's maybe even bigger than crypto speculation. It's tough to say, but it's also a market that's like, in a sense, much less developed. So instead of just plugging into existing infrastructure and serving a customer base that's already like really well developed and exists all throughout the world, we're kind of building something new from scratch. And so when you build something new from scratch, it takes a lot more time to get all of the pieces figured out, to get customers onboarded, to educate the market about the existence of this new option. And so because of that, we are starting really, really small in comparison. I think Terra is an interesting example. I think it might be fair to think about it a little bit differently from, say, USDT, in that they, as far as I'm aware, they did try to focus on consumer usage outside of crypto speculation in a particular way. I'm not familiar with the recent details of the project, so I'm really not qualified to comment in an intelligent way about it. The thing I noticed at the beginning of the project is that they were focused on people using their coin to make e-commerce transactions in Korea, in South Korea, and we just didn't really understand the point of that, right? So it's like if you look at the app and the way the transactions were happening, we didn't really see a need for those transactions to happen with cryptocurrency. It didn't really seem like there was a whole lot of additional value being provided there. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm missing there. But from our perspective, we think that the sort of biggest need for cryptocurrency outside of speculation really is this use case of giving access to people in places where normal monetary systems, normal fintech products actually can't exist. So we decided to sort of go into that different direction and see if we could serve that market. And that's why the circulating supply is so much smaller right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Morning, Nevin.
Hi, Nevin. This is
doing
James
this.
in New York. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, man. So anyway, I just want to say thanks for doing this and congratulations on all the success you've seen thus far. I mean, you not wanting to be overwhelmed with too many new users too fast seems like a good problem to have. So congratulations. My question is a technical one. Some of us RSR holders have been wondering about how arbitrage will work. Would you be able to say what, if any, limits there will be on participating in arbitrage on either a measure of frequency or volume being arbed? For instance, would I be able to arb, say, $500,000 worth of RSR at a time? And if so, does that give whales more of an opportunity to participate in arbing than people who hold less RSR? Thank you very much.
Good question. So let's see, how do I answer this? So the way to think about the arbitrage process is that it occurs at a moment where the value of the RSV token on external crypto marketplaces is slightly divergent from the pegged value. And so let's say that our RSV is pegged to the dollar, just for the sake of simplicity. If it's trading at, say, $1.01, then what that means is if you're able to purchase an RSV token for about $1 from the protocol and then go sell it for $1.01 on secondary markets, then you earn that 1 cent risk-free profit immediately. And that's what arbitrage means, is when you're buying something and selling it basically at about the same time for different prices. So to get to answering your question, well, how does that process really work if you're using RSR to participate in arbitrage? So you would be making a purchase of RSV and you'd be paying in RSR. So basically you're taking some RSR, you're spending it in order to buy RSV from the protocol, and then you're turning around and selling the RSV on secondary markets. And the question was, will there be limits on that? Or will whales end up being able to dominate that? Well, the answer is it depends on how much RSR you're willing to pay, whether or not you are the one who buys the RSV or not. So basically, the plan for that is that it will be an open auction. So let's say that RSV is trading for $1.01 on secondary markets. If I'm willing to pay 97 cents worth of RSR to get an RSV token, and you're willing to pay exactly $1, then you would get to purchase all of the RSV that's available if we're the only two bidders. And then if I were to up my bid to $1 and 0.001 cents, now I would be the one being able to purchase all the RSV. So the answer is it's an open market, and so there isn't a limitation on how much you would be able to purchase. I don't think that there's a reason to have a limitation. It just comes down to who is willing to pay the best price, because the protocol would always want the best price. You know, the sort of ecosystem itself should be getting the best price based on the market. So that means that, yeah, I think that hopefully that's an answer to your question. Do you have any, before we go to the next question, do you have any clarifications or follow-ups on that?
No, I think I'm just gonna have to wait and see how it works. But that does help me understand. I appreciate your answer. Thank you very much, Nevin.
Yep, you're welcome.
Hello. So I'm just wondering if the mainnet will be before October, as that's when the bull market will most likely 95% will end. I'm just wondering if you do it before October.
So I don't want to give any particular commitments. As people might have learned, I generally try to not commit to things unless I'm like really sure we can hit them, and we want to maintain a little bit of flexibility. But what I will say is, you know, I'm definitely aware of, you know, the different outcomes that could occur depending on when the mainnet launches, you know, given different market conditions. And so it's something that we internally are paying attention to. We're definitely considering that in our decision making.
Hi, good morning, Nevin. Quick question here. For the US people that want to purchase RSR, I know that they're purchasing it through Uniswap and other ways. I was wondering if you have any plans in the near future or in the future of listing RSR on a US only exchange.
It's a good question. I guess what I can say is, you know, I can mention the fact that, you know, Coinbase did publicly state that they were considering listing RSR. They obviously haven't listed it. So there's that possibility that they would decide to do that at some point. And, you know, there are a number of other US exchanges who are possible contenders. But, you know, as I think as you might have grown used to with crypto projects, we really can't comment on that in advance. So unfortunately, I just don't have a very satisfying answer for you. The answer is sort of, for now, you know, we're not doing that, and at some point in the future, we anticipate that happening, but we can't really say anything about any particular plans for that.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. You guys are a great Silicon Valley project, and that's where I'm from, so it's great to see you guys. Thanks.
Awesome.
Is it safe to say, as Coinbase are an investor, that it would be in their interest to list you then? So would that be a good assumption?
I mean, you know, you can make your own inferences about that. It's not my place to, you know, to indicate something like that. I think the fact that they publicly announced that they were doing research into considering listing, I think it's fair to say that that's an indication that they're interested in doing it. You know, whether or not there's a connection between their investments and their listings, you know, that's not for me to say.
Hi, Nevin. Talking about Coinbase, just a global question. What is your relationship with the main investors? Do you provide them with feedback? Do you have any contact with them? I'm talking about investors such as Sam Tellman or Peter Thiel or Coinbase. So what is your relationship with them? Thanks.
Yeah, I provide them some information about the project on a periodic basis. I would say like most of the interaction is like it isn't formal. It's, you know, just going back and forth when there's something that we need or something that they want to know, or something that they've thought of and want to offer, or a connection they want to make. So, you know, there's, you know, throughout the course of the year, there's like hundreds of those kinds of one-off interactions with our various different investors. And then something like, you know, once a year, maybe twice a year, I sit down and type out a more detailed update for them that contains, you know, a little bit of inside information about the project, and also, you know, just highlights things that maybe if they haven't been following our Twitter account, things that they might have missed if they've been busy. As the project, you know, has sort of shifted towards focusing on growth, we've had more interaction over the past couple of months with some of our key investors and advisors who for the last year, we didn't really lean on them that much because we were really pretty narrowed in on our own product work. But now we're sort of getting to the point where we're focusing on recruiting. So that means, going to those people and asking for connections. And we'll be able to start thinking about business development more seriously again throughout the course of this year. So I'd say that the pace of interaction has been picking up with our seed investors going into 2021.
Hi,
Okay,
Nevin.
thank you very much.
Hi,
Hi,
Nevin.
Nevin.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi,
just
Nevin.
inquiring, are you mainly focused on approaching consumers as opposed to governments in new countries? Or, yeah, that's my main question.
Yes, we focus on consumers and businesses, not governments. We don't have an issue dealing with governments, but generally speaking, our customers are businesses and consumers, and the businesses range from very small to actually quite large. In Venezuela, we do have some customers who are pretty large businesses who are doing really significant amounts of volume, moving. They have income in bolivars, and they want to move that money into US dollars. And so we have seen actually some pretty exciting early traction from large businesses as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, Nevin. Nevin, this is James in New York. I think you guys are doing an amazing job, and I love that you're focused on people and product. And I'm a speculator, but I'm also a supporter of what you're doing. And my question is, you talked about the challenge of scaling people onto the app, and it sounds like your approach makes a lot of sense. And so I think that's amazing what you're doing. You also talked about scaling the team. And and I like your idea of the one leader per country to drive that. My question about the team is, what do you and the team really need from us other than on Twitter or whatever? Like, what do you need from us? I've got my thing to offer other people. What do you need from us?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I do think that if an RSR holder is able to bring an essential member to the core team, like if you can help us recruit somebody who really can get into the weeds and do some significant work for the project, that's probably the biggest thing. But that's often hard to do, right? It's like you have to happen to know the right person in order to do that. So not everybody is in a position to easily contribute that. That's part of why actually we decided to run the experiment with this like recursive recruiting thing. Is like, well, what if you could refer your friends, who could refer their friends, who could refer their friends, who could eventually refer the kind of person we're looking for? That experiment, there's something a little off about the way that it works right now. So it's not spreading at the rate that it would need to for that to be successful. And I think we need to, I just haven't had time to tweak it. I think that people feel a little bit uncomfortable about the idea of like getting paid to refer their friends to things. And so maybe there's some other way that we can do that that will work a little bit better. We'll see about that. What I will say is, even if you're not in a position to refer somebody to the core team, some RSR holders are out there educating other people about the project all the time, especially on Twitter. And I super, super, super appreciate that. Like there's actually quite a lot of information that gets spread around, and ideas about the project that get spread around just through tweets, and through other things that people put together, even like memes. There's actually like a fair amount of education that can be done about the project, about what it is we're trying to do, what our mission is, about the people behind it, about the progress we've made so far. And so I think if you look at the people who are the most active in doing that education on Twitter, and I think Neve, is on this call, and I super appreciate Neve in particular. She's been like, maybe like the most prominent example of that. I really do value that, and I do think that this community has grown a lot because of people deciding to spend their own time doing that education on the internet, to bring other people into the project. And so, yeah, so if you're not in a position to recruit, then I think another great thing you can do is to help educate in that way.
Nevin, can you expand on the relationship with PayPal? And have you had any conversations about the importance of Reserve in their overall crypto business model? Thank you.
Sure. So I think my answer, unfortunately, is me kind of the same as the last call in this one, but hopefully it'll still be informative. You know, our relationship with them is, you know, we're connected to people there who really do care about crypto and blockchain. You know, PayPal has a department that is focused on crypto, and those people are for real. They're really excited about it. The thing is that, you know, there's really no getting around the regulatory and bureaucratic limitations of working with a large company. And so, you know, our conversation with them, you know, largely centers around compliance and basically, you know, waiting for internal processes to complete. And, you know, and there's still even some uncertainty about what decisions will be made about, you know, whether we'll be able to scale the PayPal channel the way that we want to. Um, and so I guess maybe I can illustrate that a little bit with a story. So back when Libra was initially announced, or actually maybe before it was announced, I reached out to Peter Thiel to say, hey, you know, do you know David Marcus? Would you be up for making an introduction? Because we're interested in talking to the team and seeing if we should maybe be working together with them instead of competing. And he had an interesting and surprising reply. So he emailed me back and he said something to the effect of, yeah, I know David, and I could make an intro, but you know, I think that you know, big companies move really slow. And I think probably a startup like Reserve shouldn't be working with any big companies. And I thought about that. I was like, huh, that's weird, you know. But like, you know, maybe there'd be this advantage to working with them. And if you think about it, you know, that was I don't know, over a year ago now, I think. They have moved really slow. Peter was actually right about that. And I think actually there was wisdom in his answer there. But I share that example to talk about how, you know, we're very excited about working with PayPal and we'll continue to work with them. And I think that we can make it happen and scale that channel. But they're a big company. And so they do have to move slow in many ways. And so we should just expect that that's going to be the case. And we need to make sure that our plans for success don't depend on them. You know, I think that there's an important augmentation that can happen, and I think it will happen. And I think it actually could be a pretty big deal. But even if it doesn't happen for a while, that's okay. Like, we're going to make it happen anyway. We have to, as a new project, we have to, you know, set up our plans so that we're not dependent on the decisions or the actions of any big company.
Hi, I have a quick question. It's about metrics and when you're planning to release just any numbers at all. I saw a couple of messages backwards and forwards on Twitter with Dan Held. Yep. When are you planning to release some numbers when you're more confident that you're not going to enable competition?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're getting there. I think I'm not sure exactly when we're going to do it, but pretty soon. Like, yeah, definitely pretty soon. Basically, you know, we're just waiting to see what happens with our growth metrics as we open up the app and what our volumes are looking like. But I think we're getting to the point where we might be ready pretty soon to make some pretty exciting announcements about those metrics. You know, as everybody knows, you know, we're still small. You know, we're still at the very beginning, so it's not like we're gonna come out and be like, hey, look, we're bigger than Binance or anything like that. But it's definitely getting to the point where I think we're going to be able to talk about some numbers, and a lot of people in the crypto world are going to kind of turn their head and be like, whoa, how did that happen? So as far as timeline, you know, next few months, I think. You know, we're not like preparing for an announcement right now or anything, but I'm excited for us to start being more public about that relatively soon.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Just to say that when you released your app retention rates, I checked against like financial apps and also banking apps, and you're outperforming them by about 200%.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty crazy. And I think the reason for that, the thing that Malo is referring to is, and I'll quote that statistic. When somebody tries a transaction in the Reserve app, 8 weeks later, there's, I think, an 88% chance that they'll still be an active user, still be using the app. And number one, we have to caveat that with the fact that we're just talking about our early adopters. So that rate probably will go down as we start, reaching people who are in the sort of, wider population. But still, it's a really exciting statistic. And I think it really validates the fact that we have taken the time to figure out how to present this product to people who really, really need it. And to present it in a way where it really is working well enough for them that they really want to keep using it. And that has been, our focus for the whole last year. And honestly, it's been at times a little bit uncomfortable because we had to make the decision as a project to sort of narrow in and focus on this sort of archaic task compared to all of the public progress we could have generated. We could have a way larger RSV market cap, we could have way more trading volume, we could have all this progress in crypto, and we decided, nope, we're gonna try to build this special product that people will really like, and we're gonna bet on that. So I'm excited for that statistic. I think that is a leading indicator that maybe we've actually succeeded in doing that. But then the proof is in the pudding. What really will display it is if we can manage to grow to a huge size. So we'll see.
Quick question here. So because the protocol is built on Ethereum and Ethereum gas fees have been very high and they vary a lot, will that be prohibitive to decentralization and hosting RSV transactions on chain? And would that in turn make mainnet decentralization kind of contingent upon the success of Ethereum 2.0?
The short answer is that, yes, in a sense, but sidechains and layer 2 solutions are going to be the answer for us, just as they are for everybody else who's serving a consumer use case. So in our app, you'll be able to hold your own keys and transact on chain, but you'll be transacting on a sidechain. So it won't be a sidechain that we host, it won't be centralized, but it won't be the Ethereum main chain. And I think that will totally handle the gas fee problem. And then if somebody wants to go take their RSV tokens and do something with them in the broader Ethereum DeFi ecosystem, they'll need to move them back onto the Ethereum chain, and then we'll have to contend with those gas fees. But many of our consumer users and business users won't have a need to do that.
Hi, Nevin. I have a kind of technical question about arbitrage. In the event long term that you do go off the dollar peg, I'm trying to imagine the sort of unit that RSV will be compared to and fluctuating against that would trigger arbitrage. In the event that there's sort of a basket of collateral that's not dollar based.
I just want to ask that.
Yep. So there's different ways that could work. So one way is if you choose a basket, and that basket is taken to be the unit of currency, essentially. So let's say that we had a really simple basket that was like, 1/3 a particular type of bond, 1/3 gold, and 1/3 US government debt or something. I'm not saying that that's what the basket should be. That's just a fake basket. But you could imagine putting that basket together and then just saying that's what the coin is worth. It's worth 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 of those. And so then in the same way as if it's pegged to the dollar, in that case, now it's just pegged to that basket. Now, you can also do something fancier where you could say, well, it's backed by that basket, but it's not pegged to that basket. We want the value of the coin to actually be relative to some other asset. And so in that case, you can use an oracle to gather whatever information about various prices of assets in the world in order to peg. So the natural thing to peg to in that case would be a fiat currency or a basket of fiat currencies. saying, you know, we want the thing to be worth, you know, 1 SDR, for instance. People have proposed more nuanced things where you actually try to gauge the purchasing power of the asset. And so in that case, you could look at, you know, if you look at like purchases that are actually made with the coin in open marketplaces, you could actually gauge, well, you know, how many hamburgers or how many whatever can you purchase with this coin. You could actually try to basically formulate a consumer price index, similar to how the Fed does with the dollar, and actually have the protocol work on that basis. Now that gets quite complicated, and I am not saying that we will necessarily pull that off, but it's an interesting research direction. And, you know, I think that you guys sometimes might get annoyed because you ask me these really good questions about like, well, how's this going to work? And then I say a bunch of things about like, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. And it's like, damn it, you know, just give the answer. Like, do you not have the particular plan? Well, the answer is we don't have the particular plan. So what we are doing, like the way I think of what we're doing is we are laying the groundwork. We are building a framework for the future of how we think currency should work. But there will have to be decisions made over the course of time, and our governance process will have to accommodate those decisions. We can't look into the future and say exactly how it should work, exactly which assets should be in the basket, and exactly how the peg should function. That's something that there actually needs to be some flexibility, and it needs to be that, you know, aligned and effective people are motivated to make those decisions over the course of time for the project to succeed. And I want to remind everybody that there is some risk there. There's some risk that we might not be able to get that governance process perfect, and so bad decisions could be made. That kind of combines the risks I wanted to point out there. So I apologize for the non-answer to some of these questions, but I'm just trying to give you guys the inside view on like that's how we really think about it. There really is that uncertainty, and those are the considerations we try to take into account when we're taking action and when we're building all of this.
Thank you.
Hi, Nevin. Like most of us on this call, I believe in the Reserve project. I just wanted to say that first. And unlike many other crypto projects, Reserve has an actual use case, and that's amazing. But more importantly, the Reserve project is clearly looking to change people's lives. I think that's the best thing. You know, people forget that often. In the crypto space, I think most people are so focused on profit that they forget what the whole point of decentralization is.
Yeah.
But anyways, my question is, assuming everything goes perfectly, what does the Reserve ecosystem look like to you? And I don't mean the relationship between RSR and RSV and arbitrage. I mean, what's your final vision for Reserve? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Final vision. Well, the core idea at the very beginning of the project was actually very, very simple. We actually started off with the question of, you know, could we create something that is, you know, works like Bitcoin, but actually works as money? Where, you know, Bitcoin, obviously because of its volatile price, and you could argue because of some other properties it has, you know, could be a gold replacement, but it couldn't really replace money. And the reason, the initial reason in my mind for why I thought it could be interesting to have something that worked like Bitcoin but functioned as money is because if you look at the long course of history, every few hundred years, the major dominant empire in the world falls apart and a new empire becomes dominant. And when that happens, the world reserve currency also, you know, ceases to be the reserve currency and often falls quite a lot in value and is replaced by the currency for the next dominant empire. And it's always seemed a little weird to me. I've always wondered, well, could you have a single currency that isn't attached to any one state, that is actually used as the world reserve currency, that maintains a stable purchasing power, roughly speaking, over the course of time, even during those transitions from one empire to the next. And so if everything goes perfectly and we actually achieve the eventual full vision, that's what it would be. It would actually be a cryptocurrency that is backed by a super diverse basket of assets that is able to maintain a stable purchasing power irrespective of the US dollar or whatever else is the world reserve, or the most prominent, I should say, fiat currency at the time. And if that happens, maybe we would see the world actually switch away from depending on the fiat currency of the dominant empire, and instead it could depend on this single cryptocurrency. So, hold on. So the idea there is, yeah, you could no longer have to contend with, sort of the crumbling of a currency every few hundred years. You would also have something that's more neutral, that's more politically neutral, used as that world reserve currency. And many of the problems that people talk about with fiat currency in the Bitcoin space, would be solved by this. So that is the long-term eventual vision. And then, as you know, we decided to focus on parts of the world where fiat currency is suffering the most in order to get a foothold for the project, in order to start building out this whole platform for using the currency, and building out liquidity and building out the brand and the community. And so, I think of this as something that would happen over, in my mind, something like 3 decades. Like, I imagine over the course of maybe 3 decades, and I'm just making that number up. That's not really a well-reasoned number, but to me, it feels possible that over the course of something like 3 decades, we could actually bootstrap to the point of being, possibly the #1 cryptocurrency. That would be the idea, and really providing a stable alternative to fiat money, that a lot of people would end up using. And the reason why I think about it on something like 3-decade timescale is it feels plausible to me that over the course of the next 3 decades, all of the things that are just initial fears about the US dollar could start to become more of a reality. And that's really what it would take to prompt people to start to switch more significantly away from the dollar and to start holding something else. And so if reserve is a really credible alternative, and really is a true backup option, then we could see that migration start to happen. So that's sort of the long-term vision. And I think that's probably a great way to end this conversation as well. Focusing on the long-term vision. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I know there's lots more questions. I know there's lots more questions, but we're already 15 minutes over, and there's a bunch of other things that I have to get to today still. But so I really appreciate everybody's questions. And you know what? If you had a question that you really wanted to ask and you didn't get to ask it, ask me on Twitter. Ask me publicly on Twitter, and I'll do my best